shut down. Now I'm asking you to restart, and not just restart, but give me the resources to do it. And so take some time, read up on that through chapter 3. There's interesting history that we don't have time to go into here. But what it boils down to is they believed in what they were doing. They believed in the calling that was there. And the rebuilding of the wall became a unifying event in not just Jerusalem, but within the entire area, within all of Judah. And when you read through chapter 3, you see that there's this tacit commendation of the people who are working there. You know, hey, this group did this, and this group did this, and this group did, and then you get to one of them in verse 5. And Nehemiah notes that the nobles of the Tekoites, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but that's okay. Y'all probably don't know any different either. The nobles of the Tekoites, says they did nothing. So they didn't lift a finger to help. We don't know why. Some speculate that there was this other ruler in the area that they were from. They were from over at Tekoa, over where I believe Amos was from. In biblical history, and maybe there was a ruler there, and they didn't want to make him mad by helping on the wall, so they just said, "No, we're not going to do anything." Others said that they weren't pleased with the leadership that had just come in. Nehemiah came in, and they just didn't like the new leadership, so we're not going to do anything. I don't personally think it's any of that. What I personally think on this doesn't matter a whole lot, but I think there's a little bit of class warfare going on here. I think the people, because it says the nobles from Tekoa were the ones not doing the work. The people from Tekoa did the work. It's like the nobles thought that they were too good for that kind of work. It's the only case listed like that in this chapter. Everybody else joined in. Whether it was priests or nobles or governors or men and women, they all worked on rebuilding this wall except for this one group. And as we go through Nehemiah, one of the things we're going to see is that things aren't always rosy in the city of Jerusalem. Things get people are people, and there's some conflict that happens there. But one of the things that we have to acknowledge when we look at applying the lessons of Nehemiah to who we are today, to who we are as a church, we have to understand that, first of all, it doesn't take much to get us off course. It doesn't take much to throw a kink in things, to knock us off of course. And one person or one group thinking that they're better than another, refusing to pull in the same direction as what the purpose and the goal of the church is, can derail even the best gospel efforts. I mentioned sometime back the illustration of, and y'all I'm sure remember the illustration of draft horses and how much weight that they can pull, as a team versus how much they can pull individually. Well, that team has to be working together. If this horse is trying to go this way and this one's going this, they're not going to get anything done. It's the same. I get these crazy thoughts that pop in my. I think I've never been on a dog sled, but I think of those sled dogs and what they're doing. You know what I mean? They some hot-blooded, high-energy kind of critters. And they're jumping all over the place, ready to go, and but whenever it's time to go, they all pull in that same direction. If they're jumping all over, beforehand, they're not getting anywhere. But when they all pull in the same direction, they get somewhere and they get there quickly. And the same is true even in the church. Pulling in different directions because I like this project or I like that project. That doesn't get us anywhere. All it does is hinders the entire project. But then when we look at the nobles of Tekoa there, I'm reminded that I can't ever think that I'm too good for whatever the work is in the kingdom of God. We can't ever think that we are too good for the work of the kingdom. Every one of us ought to have this willingness to unselfishly cooperate. It's all about the gospel purpose. It's all about getting the word of Christ to the lost. And if we're not doing that, if we're pulling in separate directions, we don't get that accomplished. But when we pull together in the same direction, we can get it done. You see, what we see here and what we need to see in our own lives is a determination to submit our personal pride, our personal ambition to the larger task that we can accomplish successfully then. It doesn't mean that we're always going to agree with one another. Certainly not. I mean, I don't always agree with myself. How do I expect everybody to always agree with me or me agree with everybody else? But it means that we have a common commitment to the task at hand, whatever that task may be. Now, when we look here in Nehemiah chapter 3, fortunately what we see is that this group of nobles, though he doesn't have nice things to say about them by noting that they didn't lift a finger to help, at this point, they haven't done anything to derail the project. Everybody else was still moving forward. These that refused to work didn't hinder things. But then opposition comes again. When you get to chapter 4 and you get to the first 3 verses of chapter 4, in the midst of all this unified work, we see that opposition comes again. And when we are doing whatever work God has called us to do, we can't expect opposition to stay away, and we can't expect it to just show up once. It's going to come, and it's going to come again. Those with a worldly mind and a worldly perspective are going to fight against the values of those who have a biblical worldview. The biblical values are antithetical to the ways of this world, and so they are always going to fight against that. Opposition in Nehemiah's day is the same as what it was today. Maybe not physically, but in the principle that as progress is made, opposition is going to increase. The more we are willing to do and the more we step out to do for kingdom work, for the gospel of Jesus Christ, the more opposition we will have. We become bigger targets. And we have to say somewhat with Nehemiah, that's okay. Our God's got this. But notice again in verse 10 that opposition doesn't always come from the outside. You know, all this stuff that's going on, and we're going to talk more about the opposition from the outside, but there's some opposition from the inside. There's some discouragement going on. Verse 10 says it was in Judah, not just in Jerusalem, but in this entire area. People are saying the strength of the laborer fails. Since there is so much rubble, we will never be able to rebuild the wall. Discouragement, doubt, all from the inside. And so Nehemiah wants to obviously fight against that. Things are progressing well. People are doing the work. People are unified and doing what they need to be doing. But again, we see this opposition, and Sanballat seemed to be the ringleader, so to speak, of it. You know, and he goes from being displeased that we saw back in chapter 2, verse 10. Then in chapter 2, verse 19, we see that he begins mocking and accusing, which he's going to continue to do that. But then when you get to chapter 4, he's furious. And he's ready to attack. He's ready to fight. He's ready to rally his troops to try to put a stop to it. And what I think is interesting here, legally there's nothing that he could have done about this. You see, Sanballat is under Persia the same as Judah is. He didn't have any more authority over Jerusalem than anybody else. He just didn't like what was going on because it lowered his influence in the area. And he accuses, a couple of different times, he's accused the Jews here of fighting against the king, doing something that the king didn't want. Well, the king had given them permission. He's the one fighting against what the king had told them to do. Remember we talked last week, Nehemiah didn't say, hey, king, give me permission to go back and do this. He said, king, send me to do this. Not just give me permission, don't just allow me, send me to do it. So he was there with the full authority of the Persian Empire. And yet Sanballat thinks that he is doing the king's bidding by wanting to fight against them. He starts to play a little bit of psychological warfare here. He starts to plant some doubt in their minds. And, he asks these things. He throws this stuff out there, and we get to read it from a third-party perspective a little bit here. But he says these things knowing that it's going to get back to the people in Jerusalem. He's not speaking directly to them at this point, but he knows it's going to get back to them. And he hopes that it's going to discourage them. Well, what's their goal? Do they really believe that they can do this? I mean, do they really know what they're doing? Can they even get it done? I mean, and then Tobiah jumps in. Yeah, if a fox jumps on it. Y'all ever built a wall like that? Probably not. Y'all do good work. If a fox jumps up on that wall, it's going to knock it down. I have built some things like that in my life. That if something lands on it wrong, that fly that lands on some project out in my workshop, that if I decide to swat at that fly, it's all going to pieces. It's still a little rickety there at the first. And he says, Are you really going to use these stones that are burned up? Now, some of us think, so where I come from, it's a lot of granite, a lot of hard stuff. Burning a stone sounds kind of silly. But they're dealing mostly with limestone. Limestone, when it gets overheated, will become brittle, fragile. It'll crumble. Now, what it may also do is if it gets a lot of moisture in there, it'll really pop apart. I had to get onto a nephew of mine for doing something that I used to do to people. That he got after a rain. We're sitting out around a fire, and he keeps picking up rocks and throwing them in the fire. Now, I used to do that. I just kind of throw a few of them in there because I knew they'd soaked up a bunch of water and they were going to explode and make some people jump. And that was okay because I did it. But when he started doing it, I was like, hey, stop that. I'm tired of getting rained on by shards of rock here. But so, yeah, stones can burn up. They can disintegrate. They can break apart. And he says, now what Sanballat does, there's some half-truths in this. A lot of the stones are still in good shape. They're just not stacked on top of each other anymore. And so he's not necessarily giving completely false statements, but he's not being accurate about things. And so he uses it to mock their construction. But look at what Nehemiah does once again. He breathes out just another quick prayer. He throws up a flare. Just as he had done back before when the king asked him back in chapter 2, what do you want? He throws up a quick flare here. That flare mattered, remember, because he had spent so much time on his knees praying before God that now, God, here it is. This is the moment. I need you. It wasn't I've never prayed about this before, but God, will you do this? Will you act? He throws up a flare that is based upon what he has already lived, how he's already lived his life. Don't think that he stopped praying about the wall and about rebuilding the wall once he got to Jerusalem and started building the wall. He had spent 4 months praying about it when he was back in Susa. He's continued to pray about it now. 3 quick notes here about his prayer. They're very common, or very have a lot in common with what we call imprecatory psalms. Psalms that call for the demise of one's enemies. And he calls for God's divine judgment for their sin. He calls for God to act. He says, I'm not asking you, God, to give me power to go have my vengeance on them. God, I want you to act. First, judge them for their sin. God, will you act? And then his prayer also expresses a zeal for God's work, for what God was doing. He had God's honor in mind. That's why he wanted to go and build the wall in the first place, remember? It wasn't so much about the wall, it was about the people. The people in Jerusalem were distressed. The people in Jerusalem were disgraced. And he said, that's reflecting on my God. You and I should understand that obviously we should be a people of prayer. We should be a people of constant and persistent prayer. But sometimes those flares, we need to throw up those flares. We need to say, God, I'm in a moment here. I need you now. I've spent time praying. I'll spend more time praying. But God, right now, I'm in a moment that I don't have the opportunity to go and kneel before you for 5 or 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. God, I'm in a moment that I need you right now. We throw up that flare, and it matters because we spend time before. You see, prayer has to be what we go to first. God, I'm in a moment. I need you now. Not take care of this, and then, God, will you bless this now that I've done this? Will you do something now that I've already acted? Can't be a matter of last resort. When Nehemiah prays here, he doesn't pray, God, there's nothing else that I can do. He says, God, it's all up to you. This is your time. This is for you to act in, not for me. And when he has this prayer, the Bible calls for us to love our enemies. The Bible calls for us to seek to take the gospel to them. The Bible calls for us to exemplify the gospel to the lost. But notice here he has said that God judged them for their sin. He just says, they have wronged you, Lord. He's not talking about, at this moment, he's not talking about what they have done to him or to the builders. He said, they've wronged you. Judge them for their sin. It's God's work that they're trying to hinder. If we start praying, and we start praying, I don't know how to say it, but we start praying against our enemies, we better be sure that we're praying God's will first. God, I'm praying that you will judge them for their sin. Not because they did something I didn't like. Oh, there's people doing stuff we don't like all the time. God, there are things that they are doing against you. Will you work in that? Will you bring your holiness to bear on that? Because if we ask God to judge the sin of others, you better be clean before God yourself. You better be right before God. You better be above reproach. God's going to say, yeah, what about you? What about you? What we see is that God does act. The people began to come together. They were working on their projects. They're working on their section of the wall. But again, this unified goal of we got to build this wall, now the unity comes in joining the sections. Because it doesn't do any good to build a section of wall or a bunch of sections of walls if you don't join them together, right? They gain strength by being linked together. They gain cohesion by being linked together. Wall sections that are not connected to one another are easy to topple. The house we moved from when we came up here, so like everything down there, it's built on the side of a hill because that's the choice you have. You either build on top of the hill, you don't want to build down in the bottom, so it's either on top of the hill or into the hill, on the side of the hill. And so we had some big retaining walls there. I mean, these things were the big 80 or 100-pound landscaping blocks that, and the whole driveway was held up with it was just this big. Then you had terraces over here. Well, in order to make one of in order to make that turn on the upper terrace where the property line was, some genius thought, in order to get that radius that tight, I've got to cut this block. And so they would cut the blocks in half, and then they were able to make that radius. The problem is, the way that those blocks are designed, any of y'all who have ever, they had these fiberglass pins, about half-inch diameter, and you'd put a couple of those in, and as the pressure came against the block, everything pushed together, and it became more solid as pressure was put against it. But when you cut them in half, there's no place for those pins, and so as I looked at it when we first moved in, like, it's not bad. But I went up there and I scratched this mark on a block, and we'll see how far this thing moves. Now, 16 and a half years later, it had moved about 3 inches, which doesn't seem like a lot. Until you're down there on the road and you're looking up at that going, that's going. That's going. I mean, one of these days, that wall's going to fall. I mean, there's no way around it. Because they weren't hooked together. It wasn't linked together to gain strength from those around it. It couldn't take the pressure of what was pushing against it. The wall had to be joined together so that it could take the pressure. This section was taking pressure off of this section, and it was spreading it out so that they could stand. Verse 6 said the people they joined it together up to half its height, for the people had the will to keep working. They'd gotten the wall to half its height. It had become a tangible thing. It had become a measurable thing. Too often we think, well, what do we do in church? Well, we do this, we do. Is it tangible? Is it measurable? Can we point to something? Look, numbers, numbers are numbers. I care about numbers because they represent people, but beyond that, numbers are numbers. It's just, you can manipulate them in a lot of different ways. But is something measurable? Are we doing something that we can put our finger on and say, this is what God is doing here? And the people were encouraged because there was a tangible, measurable progress that was going on. God had answered their prayer. He had continued to be faithful, and the people got encouragement from that. But once again, what we see is that when progress is made, as we move through this chapter, that when progress is made, opposition will come and it will intensify. You see, Sanballat and his buddies had gone from griping about things to trying to discourage people to, again, now they're trying to link up themselves to say, all right, now we're going to fight. Now we're going to attack them. There's a collaborative effort going on here. But what we see, we've seen a unity of purpose. We've seen a unity in the work. Now we see a unified defense. A unified defense. Again, there's this flare prayer that Nehemiah lifts up to God. And he says, God, they're organizing against us. Verse 9, so we prayed to our God. But notice the verse doesn't stop there. It says, and then we stationed a guard because of them. They prayed and they trusted that God would work, but they put feet to their prayers. They put feet to their trust. They said, they understood that belief is followed and demonstrated by action. To pray and to just sit back and say, well, now God's going to do it. Well, God can. But most of the time in the Bible, He's saying, I'm going to work through you. I'm going to empower you. I'm going to give you the authority, the ability, the whatever, the gifts, the whatever resources you need. I'm going to provide them, but you've got to do the work. That's why Nehemiah had come to Jerusalem to begin with. He didn't just simply pray from over in Susa and say, hey, God, I really wish you'd do something about Jerusalem. I really wish you'd rebuild those walls. He prayed, and then he said, but God, I'll go. If you want me to go, I'll go. And God said, yeah, I want you to go. There's no difference here. There's a threat, there's prayers, and then the guard was stationed. He acted. There'd been unity in organizing things, unity in purpose, unity in building the wall and the sections and joining the sections. And again, now there's unity in defending this city. Families were prepared to fight together. Fathers, sons, uncles, brothers, nephews, they were all there. And Nehemiah points that out. You're not just fighting for this city, you're fighting for the one next to you, your family member that's there. Running is not an option. You're fighting to protect people, not just a city. And see, he said, because he did all this because Nehemiah said the work for the Lord can't be halted. It can't be slowed down. It can't be compromised simply because of fear of the enemy. When we do these things, he says, well, there's going to be opposition. But we can't let that opposition scare us. Nehemiah had a plan, half worked and half stood guard. Those who toted the materials to the workers, carried with one hand and had a weapon in the other. Sam, how much work would your guys get done if they were working one-handed? Not half as much. Some days it probably seems like they're working one-handed. But I mean, you think about it. Now the people who were up on the wall, the people who were doing the I kind of call it the master work, the ones who are really building it, they need both hands. So he says, just strap your sword to your side in case you need it right there. Keep it with you. But you got both hands free. Those of y'all who would be like me that didn't know how to build a wall, they just kind of the labor behind it. Y'all can carry something. You don't need both hands. Link up together with somebody, grab a rope, grab a handle, grab a stone, and carry it there. He says, then if you hear a horn sound, rally to it. And then, rally to it because there's a fight there. But when the fight's over, you're going back to work. When it's done, hey, we have a plan. We have a purpose. We know what we're supposed to be doing. If we have to take time off for the defense, that's one thing. But we are going to come back to doing. We're not going to be stopped. The people had this unity. They had to support one another. These external pressures that were going to come against them were just going to magnify any internal pressures that were there. Those little fissures that form between people and between groups of people are only going to magnify into fractures and break things apart if they don't work together to defend each other. So some stood guard while others worked. I'm sure at some point they switched off. And this wasn't just about physical security. There's a psychological factor there. Hey, I can work and do my job and not worry about it because Joe's over there and he's pretty good with a bow. He's going to see somebody a ways away and he can take care of me. He's, Jim over here is pretty good with a spear. Bubba ain't real good with a sword, but he's there. He'll at least give me a chance to get mine out. I don't know. Those aren't real Jewish names, but the psychological fact of knowing that somebody is watching for. When I was on a mission trip as a teenager, that I won't go into the whole story, but we began to get. I was talking to an individual and in a great theological debate with them. And this crowd began to get around us. And I don't like people being behind me, especially people that I don't know. And a friend of mine was standing there beside me, and he just turned. He was right here. His shoulder was right against mine, and he just turned and put his back right against my back. And instantly in that moment, my mind went from seeing all these people around to seeing this person right in front of me because I knew he was watching my back. There's a psychological effect that happens when we know that others are watching out for us. Every person here in Jerusalem was necessary. Every person needed to depend upon one another. Every person was there to encourage the others, whether through their work or through their protection. Those from outside the city were encouraged to remain in the city. It helped build unity. It helped bring protection. It demonstrated, again, a purpose of the work to the people. And it helped them rally together. But don't ever forget what Nehemiah told them in the midst of all of this. He says, our God will fight for us. Yeah, we're going to station a guard. Yeah, we're going to have weapons. Yeah, we're going to look now. Are they really that good at fighting? That's debatable. They haven't been in a lot of battles. This generation of folks. He says, our God will fight for us. We put the effort in. We take the step forward. We stand in faith, and God will fight for us because it's His responsibility to bring the victory. If we're obedient, He will work. If we are unified, He will move amongst us. And what did we talk about last week? That He will do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. That is what God will do through a unified people. This morning, can you truly say that you're ready to do the work that God's called you to? Can you truly say that, God, I'm not 100% sure what my role is yet, but I'm committed to whatever that role is. God, maybe you need to join the team, so to speak. This time is a great time to join the church if you haven't joined already, but it's even better opportunity to give your life to Christ if you haven't already. Because that's where it all begins. Understanding that apart from Christ, you are lost. Understanding that all of us are sinners and in need of salvation through grace. And it's only Jesus that can bring that. So it's a better opportunity to join that team. But if maybe you say, you know what, I think I think I can unify with this group of folks. They're a little odd. That's okay. Doesn't matter what church you go to, they're all going to be odd. They all going to be strange. That's okay. Maybe you say, I think I can link arms with them because the gospel purpose that's there. There are things that we need to do that move us forward as a body of believers in this community to reach the lost who are around us. I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. I think the last statistics I saw was that 68% maybe 72% of the people around us right now are lost. And I'm not worried about what other churches are doing or not doing. What are we doing? What are we willing to do to even bring that number down by 1 percentage point, 2 percentage points, just to see people saved? What are we willing to say, you know what? I can be unified with that goal. God, thank you for the opportunity to share your word this morning. Father, there's so much in your word. And Lord, I know that there's so much in the passage that we looked at today that just didn't get to. I've said it before, Lord, and you know it's not original with me, but I'm grateful that the Bible is the only book I'll never finish, because you always have something new there for us. God, thank you for calling us to unity. Thank you for examples of unified people and unified work within Scripture. God, I pray now that you would move us as you see fit. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. Will you stand with us, please?